I believe it takes guts to live the second half of your life for you when you've lived the first half for everybody else.
Welcome to the Midlife Reinvention Podcast. I'm your host, Kavita, and the founder of Power Purpose Play, a global community of women in midlife. I'm here to tell you that it's your time now to rediscover what has always been inside of you and bring that out into the world. If you're wondering what's next, but don't know quite what that is, or if you feel a twinge in your heart telling you that you have so much more to do and so much more to offer, you're in the right place. Ask yourself, if not now, when? Do you want to leave your job, start your own business, take control of your health, reignite the passion in your marriage, write that book, or at least that first chapter? Transitions like this can be daunting, but through listening to my story and interviews with incredible women every week, I hope to inspire you to take action. I rediscovered myself after the age of 50, and I know you can too. It's my time now to help you do just that. I'm so excited you're here. Let's dive in. I'm very, very pleased to have a very special guest here today who's going to help us find our courage to face the second act of our lives, with renewed passion and purpose. And I'm pleased to welcome Sheree Clark today. Sheree is a Midlife Courage Coach. She is a TV show host, a very inspiring speaker, and an accomplished author. Sheree has written and presented on topics ranging from finding your passion to overcoming career burnout. And her Fork in the Road coaching practice, which I love the name, by the way, keeps her busy with clients one-on-one and in groups on creating authentically fulfilling lives. So pleased to have you here. Welcome to our podcast, Sheree.
Thank you.
Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing fabulous. It's a joy to be here, and this is a high point of my day.
Oh, wow. Mine too. So, Sheree, I wanted to speak to you today, not only to get your expertise and advice for our listeners today, but also to hear your story, of reinvention, because I believe you have a great story of reinvention, to inspire our listeners, to take action in their lives and to change what may not be serving them well anymore. So, perhaps I could start with a question. Your business is called your Midlife Courage Coach. So what exactly does that mean? And I imagine from my perspective, it means facing fears that maybe we as women in midlife are going through and helping them through that. Is that correct? Or
that's a part of it. Yes. And so Fork in the Road, actually, when we talk about reinvention, most of us have lots of points of reinvention. And what happens is we start thinking about the big ones, divorce or death of a spouse or the decision to change careers. But, I call my practice Fork in the Road because at any given point, we're all at a fork in the road. And they're little forks. They're little decisions that actually add up and accumulate to become those big decisions in our lives. And so if you think about it from a health and well-being standpoint, which is actually where I started, I called my practice Fork in the Road because I was a health coach, nutrition. I dealt with food. And so the fork was all about food and decisions. Well, when I evolved to become a life coach, the name stayed because it still fits. So if you think from a health and wellness perspective about what could a fork in the road be? It could be little decisions like, if I have one glass of wine, I can sleep pretty well and it's nice and I relax. If I have two, my sleep is disrupted. If I have three, I'm not going to go to the gym. Now, that's not a life-changing decision, but it can be. If I make the decision to have 3 glasses of wine day after day after day, I have made some bigger decisions than whether or not I'm going to drink. And so back to your question about Midlife Courage Coach, I have a thing that I like to say that I think is really kind of sums it up. And that is this. I believe it takes guts to live the second half of your life for you when you've lived the first half for everybody else.
That's exactly right. And you hit it on the nail, because that's exactly what it's my time now means. Because really, as women, especially, we've always looked after other people, whether it's our parents or kids or, spouse or anybody else, our employer. And it's really our time now to take that time to listen to ourselves. And that's such a great advice about the little decisions, because yes, it's daunting often to think about, these huge decisions that we have to make. But if you take little decisions one by one, then that really, I think, helps in terms of building your courage, I would say, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because what happens is that women who are facing a decision point, let's say it is for a big one, again, relationships, do I stay, do I go, do I change my career? What happens is we start thinking about that. Oh, I really know I need to change. And then paralysis. To think about that is just, it's daunting. So we push it away. Yes. And we don't deal with it and confront it. Where if you broke it down into small pieces, like I don't have to decide today, but what I might do is look at my resume and see if I could update it. Maybe I'll have lunch with a friend who's doing what I think I might like to do in my career next, and ask her what that's like. What are the barriers to entry? What training do I need? Break it down into little pieces. Don't be daunted by the big decisions, the big hairy things that sound so fundamental.
Right. And that's amazing. I mean, that I try to do that every day, but it's hard. Sometimes, you've always got these things in your mind and it's like, oh, I have to do this, but taking baby steps, I think, is so important. And I guess, prior to being Midlife Courage Coach, you had several career changes yourself, I believe. And you must have gone through these fears as well. But can you tell us a little bit about how you came to do what you're doing and what motivated you to make some of these changes?
Yeah, so that's one of those, a living example of what we're talking about. So I owned an advertising agency for 25 years before I'm doing what I'm doing now. And for those of you who might be trying to figure it out, I'm in my 6th decade of life. And so I've been around the sun a few times. And so in that period of time, in the 25 years that I owned an advertising agency, it was very successful. I made a lot of money. I was well known. I published 3 books. It was like, from everybody else's perspective, it's like I had the dream, and for a long time, I loved it. I loved the life. I loved flying 100,000 miles a year. And I loved the pace of it all and all of that. Well, over time, like many things, we become dissatisfied. And that can be from a variety of reasons. One is, as we age, our interests and our passions and our energy level changes, shifts, whatever. And then we need a challenge. And I've gotten to a point where I felt like I wasn't challenged anymore. And the hard part about being in that place is that everybody around you reinforces that whole persona that you have, that whole identity that you have. People viewed me as, this is my friend Sheree, she owns this well-known agency. And when I started to make the hint to my friends that, I'm not so sure that this is for me anymore. And their response was, what are you, crazy?
Are you crazy? Yeah. I was just going to say, yes, exactly. Yeah.
Right. You have the life I covet. I want your life. I want to fly first class everywhere. I want your job. I want this. I want that. And you can't get them to understand that while those trappings are wonderful, especially when they're new, they lose their luster. And it's a very lonely road, or it can be. And that's why I think when we talk about courage, it took courage for me to be able to stand up in at least part of it without support from where you'd expect it to be. I thought my friends would all be cheering me on. Yeah, girlfriend, you do what you want. And they were all aghast. Well, can't you just hang on until you retire and do something else, your next version? And I'm thinking, my life is now. I was 53 and, that was over 10 years ago. And I think I could still be there. No, please. So,
yes.
Yeah. So I made the decision to make the change. And that was what I would call probably my most recent and most monumental shift.
Well, what you just described is exactly what I went through. I had the seemingly perfect career and life. And there was something inside of me as I turned 50 that it was like I was not fulfilled as much anymore. And I hear you when it's, you want the support from people around you, but sometimes it's like they're questioning it, like, why would you do that? It's not only the external things that you have in it's also your internal brain that says, I'm not good enough, or maybe I shouldn't be doing this, or maybe I'm too old, or maybe I'm not, I don't have the skills or talents, going back to what you were saying earlier. So how did you decide then to go from that to being, you think you were in nutrition, and then you're a courage coach?
Yes. So the big shift was going from ad agency to something else. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I did, and we were talking about those small forks in the roads, those little decisions, you start feeling dissatisfaction a long time, typically, I found, before you make a change, because you want to be sure and you're playing it safe and you're thinking, oh, well, maybe I'm just fill in the blank. Maybe I'm just hormonal. Maybe I'm just having a funk. Maybe I just need some new responsibility. And I found a lot of different salves along the way. That was why I wrote books. I wasn't happy with what I was doing. And writing a book is a distraction. You throw yourself into it and it becomes this whole thing, much the way that eating can numb you out, or drinking, mm-hmm. or shopping, or any of those kinds of things. And the cool part about it is it's, quote, healthy, because I birthed a book when I was done with it, and right. Never mind that I was doing it to numb out. And I realized it even at the time, but it was all good, And so you start doing all those kinds of things. And then when you come out the other side of it, that's when you start thinking, all right, I've written the book, but the pain is still there. Mm-hmm. So now what do I do? And for me anyway, it was a breaking it down of what am I going to do? What can I do? What shift can I make? And I started taking classes of things that interested me. Mm-hmm. Food was always interesting to me. I went to culinary school for fun, not because I was going to do anything with it. Nutrition, another interest. I love being healthy. So what happened is I started accumulating these experiences and realizing they were the joy in my life. That was why I wanted to get up early in the morning. It wasn't because I wanted to go work in an advertising agency that I had owned for 25 years. It was the other things. Mm-hmm. And that became the clue to what it was I should be doing next. Mm. So it's a matter, I think, of listening and of looking at the breadcrumbs that you're leaving along your own trail.
Mm-hmm. That's such great advice. And I think for our listeners, it's really practical. And what I would ask is, how would somebody know, like, for example, people who are listening right now, how would they know when they're not really living up to their own potential or living their purpose? Because, you can have that twinge, but how do you know that this isn't the right, you're not living up to your real purpose?
Well, I'll give you two. One's a little bit less deep than the other. And so we'll start with the less deep one.
Okay.
and it's practical, and it's something that listeners could do right now while they're tuned into us. And that is open up your calendar, your schedule, mm-hmm. your day, your diary, whatever it is you call it, and take a look at your week. And take a look at your commitments. What am I obligated to? What did I say I was going to do? What meetings do I have? What have I got planned? And look at each one of those obligations one by one and feel in your body what your reaction is. And if you feel like, I look at my schedule and I saw that we had this appointment and I was like, oh, good. I love, this is what I love. I could do this all day. This is a good thing.
Me too. Yeah.
Yes. And it's joy producing, and you know that. And then you look at the rest of your schedule. And if there are things there, now clearly, if you've got your annual exam scheduled, nobody's looking forward to that. That's a necessary thing. But I have looked before in different parts of my life and seen a committee meeting. And let's say I'm the chair of the committee or a member, it doesn't matter. And I feel dread. I wish for a sudden snowstorm so that it would get canceled. I hope that something happens and I can avoid this. That's a clue. So that's one place. That's one practical place to start, realizing that there are some things we can't do anything about. But those things that, if you've got staff meetings, maybe you shouldn't be supervising a staff anymore and you should look at having your duties reassigned. Maybe it's a committee, maybe it's a church obligation, whatever it is. Be willing to entertain the idea of a shift. Mm-hmm. The second is a little bit more deep and a little bit more profound. And that is to sit in stillness and in quiet without music, without distraction, without checking your emails, preferably maybe in nature, and to ask yourself how you're doing. How are you doing? The way that you would ask a friend when you see that the friend has suddenly lost weight, and not necessarily in a good way, or you see the friend looking harried, or someone, a child, a spouse, someone that you love, and you just know. And so you rest your hand on theirs or on their shoulder, or you look them in the eye and you say, how are you? How are you doing? And usually when you ask a person who's a little bit on the edge, that question, what do you get? A reaction, tears, something visceral. Be ready for that for yourself. Ask yourself, how am I doing? Where does it hurt?
That's so important, and I think a lot of us don't do that enough, but I do think that probably in the last year, and I don't know if you agree with this, with what we've been going through, the pandemic and everything, I think people have had more time to really look internally and ask those questions. And I hope they do. And I think that's one of the perhaps good things that's come out of this, is that we've had more time to reflect and ask those questions, which I agree. And that's one of the things I did and I espouse, is really listening, and it's not even meditating. It's just being in stillness, and asking those questions of ourselves. So once we ask those questions, and maybe we come up with the answers, what is the next step, and why do you think it takes guts or courage to take the next step, or to be the best version of yourself? And, you think it'd be easy, but it's not. Why isn't it easy?
Well, part of it we've alluded to, and that is a lack of support. If your friends aren't there, or your whatever, it doesn't have to, it could be spouse, loved ones, your parents, wherever your support comes from. If that's not there, it's hard, because that's where the validation comes from. The other thing is, I think that we forget the path that we've taken prior. So much of our early days was first steps that were new, that were bigger and scarier. Like your first job, that's a scary deal. Like, what you don't know, like if you live in a city, do I take the subway to get to work, or how do I get there? And what is expected of me? What if I'm late? What if I'm sick? What if all these things? And so we forget all that. We forget that we were beginners, and now we're in this place and we're like, oh, well, you know what? I know all this. This is the devil that I know. And you forget about the change. And here's the part about that I think we need to give ourselves a break. In those early days, we had built-in mechanisms. I went to college. There was a class about how to get a job. There was a counselor that showed me how to put together my resume. There were things all along the way. I belonged to clubs and organizations. When you first start out, your boss takes you under their wing and they introduce you. You do the networking thing. You got all this. When we get to be a certain age, there's this assumption that we've arrived. And everybody around us assumes that we know what we're doing, whatever. Yeah, you're the new girl, but we don't really need to take care of you because you're 50.
Right.
And you think that you should get it. It should be easy. But we've forgotten that it's not. Anything new requires some adjustment and sometimes a little bit discomfort. But as you alluded to, Kavita, and I think your point is really, I would echo it. This period of time that we're still in a pandemic as we're recording this, has been a monumental time for people if they choose to take the opportunity to really go deep and to reflect and to have some changes. And my hope is that we continue that. My hope is that we don't go back to the old normal and the old way. And that's the challenge.
I agree. And you said something about starting something new, but there's another aspect to it, which I wanted to get your opinion on, is as women in midlife, we have so many experiences. We have so much knowledge. We have so much to offer the world. And oftentimes we don't realize that, or we don't actually give ourselves the credit that, oh my God, I've done all this. I've actually done this. And so I am capable of doing the next thing that I want to do. So I think that, do you find that in your clients? Do you find that often that they don't realize like the amazing shit they've done in their life?
Oh, hell yes. Yes.
Okay.
I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday and I had to remind her and point it out to her. Like, she's raising a daughter right now and the daughter's having some issues, and we were chatting about it and what to do. And she said, I'm beside myself. I don't know what to do. I've never faced anything like this before. And she's also an entrepreneur. And I said,
yes, you
Really?
have.
Yeah.
And I reminded her, she goes, oh, I forgot about that. She's had employee issues. She's had different, all of the things that we endure when you were entrepreneurs or just living. And she was like, yeah, I forgot about that. And one of the exercises, Kavita, that I have some of my clients do is to make a list of their successes, write down. It's one of the promotional product that I have. It's called Courage Journal. And the first exercise is to write down 100 successes. Well, it's really easy to write things down like, well, I graduated from college and then I got a graduate degree. And so, you write down those things. But what about surviving adolescence? What about, for me, one of the things that I wrote, I passed my driver's test. And the reason that that's on there is I failed it twice before I passed it. And so by the time I passed it, I was 17. And so that's a long time ago, but I can go back there and remember what it felt like after 2 failed attempts. It's like, woohoo, wow, I did it. Not only did I pass, I stuck with it. I didn't fold. I didn't fall apart. I didn't, so yeah, we
don't give ourselves enough credit for sure. Yeah.
No.
So maybe it's kind of changing it a little bit, but I was just thinking about why do people tend to settle? Even though they may not be content, like you and I, yourself and myself, we were discontent with our current circumstances. So we made a change, right?
Yep.
But why do some people still settle and even if they're not happy with their current circumstances? Hi, my friend. Kavita here. Do you often feel blocked from moving forward? We all feel that way at times. These are referred to as energy blocks. I've created a short, actionable PDF guide to help you release your negative energy blocks. Click the link in the description to download it now for free. Now, let's get back to the episode.
I think sometimes it's that they have a polarity inside. They think, I'm not happy with what I have and where I am right now. And if I were here, whatever here is, point B, from A is unhappy, B is happy, but they see that there's barriers between A and B, for whatever those things might be. And they forget that there is a continuum between A and B. It's not a dot and a place you jump from and to, that it's gradient and there are scales. And so maybe if your career isn't serving you, it's not a question of, do I stay in this job or do I quit? That's pretty polarized. What if in the interim you could move to part-time? What if you could work from remote, which we're all doing now? What if there were shifts? What if there were other things? What if there were steps closer to, as opposed to having to make the quantum freaking leap off the cliff, worrying that you're not going to grow the wings on the way down? What if it's just a little bit safer? And courage doesn't mean doing unsafe things. It doesn't mean take the leap of faith and quit the job without the safety net, leave the marriage, who cares? No, I'm not espousing that. What I'm saying is, don't be afraid to peek out and look and push the edges and whisper to a friend, I'm thinking I might want to, whatever. Just start small.
Yeah, that's so true. And often starting small is the first step. And then as you take action, you do one thing and it's like, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. Right.
Yes.
and that one piece of that one action that you took leads to more confidence and the next thing and the next thing. And then it just builds and builds. And as you know, it can lead to your dream that you maybe always wanted to do. And now you realize, oh my God, I actually can do it.
Yes.
So that's fantastic. So just maybe going back to you personally, was there ever a time that you didn't feel that maybe you were your best, and was there a time that you were like, oh my God, I don't feel good about myself? And how did you overcome those feelings?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And they still happen. And sometimes they're little ones, like Well, like now during the pandemic, the COVID-19, and you put on your skirt to go someplace, and you're like, well, maybe I won't be wearing this for a while, And so
you wear the nice top, but the the sweatpants at the bottom because no one is going to see.
Exactly. So sometimes it's like, that can become a big thing, but it's let's be realistic on the scale of grandiose. It's not that big of a deal. We can lose the weight, or we can do whatever we need, or buy a bigger size. So, when I'm feeling like I haven't been my best self, most of the time I recognize where it came from. And where it came from was those forks in the road that I talked about earlier, the little forks. It's the accumulation of the little things that got me to the place where I don't feel like I'm in a good spot. It could be, in the eating category, it's getting in the habit of having dessert at every meal. Or it could be getting out of the habit of going for a morning walk because the weather has changed and I live in a 4-season state, all of those kinds of things. So I think it's a matter of getting real with yourself and saying, I've allowed this to creep. It's like scope creep in the corporate world. When you've got a project and all of a sudden you didn't sign up for this part of the project, that wasn't part of your thing, but all of a sudden that's on your plate too. And then we call that scope creep because all of a sudden now you've got everybody's projects on your plate.
Right.
It happens the same way. And so for me, sometimes it might be the worst. It's easy for me to talk about food and exercise. Those are relatively easy to fix. We know what to do. The hard part for me is when I get lazy, when I do a 85% job, put myself 85% into a project,
right?
Or something that's, I can get by, but I don't want to get by. And if I get by too many times, I start feeling bad about myself. And then that's reflected in my other decisions.
Right. I was thinking about something in that, when I listen to, or when I see other very successful people, or, people are listening to podcasts and success stories. And what happens sometimes is they feel like imposters, they feel like, well, that was easy for that person because they did they're so and so. So that imposter syndrome comes up, and I'm sure you see that in your clients as well. So what would you say to somebody that says, feels like an imposter, that they can't do it, or that they're not at their best in life, but they don't know how to get it?
Yeah.
And they, do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. And in some ways, what you're kind of referring to, it's almost like FOMO, fear of missing out, but you're looking at the other person going, I'm so envious. And it's not a jealousy thing, but you're like, I don't measure up. So I feel like I'm not getting there. Here's the thing. If you are listening in this conversation that Kavita and I are having, I have told you I've gained weight during COVID. I flunked my driver's test, not once, but twice. I have been in that situation where it took me 10 years to go from being unhappy to finally getting the hell out of my business that I had for 25 years. I was in it for 25 years, and the last 10 sucked, progressively sucked worse and worse and worse. So that doesn't mean I'm not capable. That doesn't mean I'm not good at what I do. It means I have doubts. It means I don't have all my shit together either. And so if you go below the surface and you find somebody that's real and you can have a conversation with, like you've asked me some very real questions, and I feel as though I owe it to you to give you some very real answers. If you can find somebody, and I know you can because we're abundant, ask them, when did you feel doubt? How did you deal with it? And remember that we're all on this journey. There are some things that I'm damn good at and have been damn good at, I think, from the womb. But there's a lot more things that I've sucked at, never got good at, finally got better at, or whatever. So it's a continuum.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone has doubts. Everyone has fears. And it's just a matter of how we approach them, how we deal with them. And maybe that would be a good question for you, is maybe if there's a baby step, or a takeaway that after listening to us today, our listeners could implement today, that to kind of help us to take the first step or the next step on this journey of reinvention.
Yes.
Can you give us a tip or a couple of tips?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
So the first step is to take a step. And by that, I mean anything. I don't care if it's go visit somebody's website, visit my website because you were listening to me and you were like, hey, I want to learn more about her. I want to do what she's doing. I think that sounds interesting. That's a first step. And then pause and congratulate yourself and then say, that wasn't too hard. I bet I can take another one. And then you go from there. So again, the theme here is small recurring steps. Another is to seek outside support, have that conversation with someone else that we've talked about. Ask those questions about, hey, I'm feeling a little bit like this. Have you ever been in that place? Mm-hmm. I recognize that requires a little bit of vulnerability. And for some people, that's easier than it is for other people. For me, I don't have a hard time being vulnerable. I find that I get my vulnerability by saying to somebody, I am lost when it comes to this. I need help. I am confused. That I get what I need and that I attract the people that have what I need. If that comes more difficult to you, part of me wants to say, get over yourself. You're in your own damn way. Step out of the way. But if that sounds a little harsh, then maybe another thought would be, again, push the door open before you fling it open. So push around the edges, ask somebody, I'm just curious if you could tell me a little bit about your life. You don't even have to tell them about yours. Mm-hmm. But you'll find that commonality, just like you and I in our conversation are finding things that I know we can have subsequent conversations about.
Of course. Yeah.
Commonalities. And that's what we're looking for. We are not, even though it seems like it sometimes when we are so isolated because of the pandemic, we're either alone or we're in our pod or whatever. We're really not. We really are a village.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so important what you said, many things you said, but also one of the most important things is finding the help and asking for it. We're not alone in this world. Like you said, there's so much available. And it's also part of being communities, part of being that community that and that's part of why I created Power Purpose Play, because this community of women that we are all going through many similar changes and shifts in our lives, and how do we actually get through those? So that's so important to really reach out and to ask for the help. That's so important.
Kavita, I'm gonna add to my own point. And that is when you're reaching out, especially if you're in that I don't want to be vulnerable category, but even if you're not only reaching out to ask for help, but to give it. Because when I have been in the deepest throes of feeling hopeless or my life sucks, if I can lend a hand to somebody else, it has an amazing way of making me feel elevated, which sounds terribly selfish and all right, well, I'll own it. But so maybe you do give to get. And what I get out of giving or helping or being a support or an ear or a mentor or whatever it is that I'm good at and can offer, if my get is that I feel good and in the process, I've made someone else more successful, more self-confident, whatever it is, then I'll take it. It's a win-win.
Well, obviously you are doing that because you are from your own life experience, the fact that you shifted careers a few times and now you're giving back to tell people this is how I did it. This is learned from me, and these are some of the tips, and you're giving back, and it's very commendable.
Thank you.
And so this might be a little bit of a strange question, but like I'm asking anyway.
Do
if you had a do-over in your life or part of your life, would there be something that would you wanted to do over?
That's a great question. I think everybody at some point has the little things, I wouldn't have taken that class because it screwed up my GPA or whatever.
Right.
But for me, I think I'm going to zoom out on that question and say, I think that if there's one recurring question, because how you do one thing is how you do everything. We all have patterns of behavior. I would act sooner. That would be my, not a regret, I guess, but or maybe a do-over. Act sooner. 10 years is a long time to be in a business that you've outlived, you've outgrown, it's outlived its usefulness to you. That's a long time. I don't think I would have done it on the first day. Oh, I feel like a little bit anxious. I better get the hell out of here. No, I don't say that. But I might have cut the time down even by 25% would have given me a couple of years, So I think it would be to move more swiftly.
That's interesting, because as you were saying that, I was thinking about how women especially, we feel as though we're not qualified to do things, So if you're thinking of starting something new or changing, whether it's career or anything else, like you feel like, okay, well, maybe I need to go back and get a degree or get a certificate or get more qualified because, and then that takes time, right? So then, like you said, you may end up doing what you're doing for longer than you should have, because you're not taking the leap and realizing that you actually have enough experience, enough qualifications to do that thing. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
So true.
Yeah. So, wow, there's been a lot here that we've gone through. And I think, our listeners can gain so much from your expertise and from your own experience. Do you want to tell us anything else that's on your mind, or also how our listeners can reach you, and anything special that's going on in your business or your life?
Yes, absolutely. So a couple of things. Yeah. I don't know when people will be listening to this. I host an interview series. I've got one that's coming up really soon. In fact, it's tomorrow. It launches. It's called The Magnificent Midlife Woman. And you can access that at magnificentmidlifewoman.com. And even if you go and the interview series is over, you can still see what we've done and then be on the waiting list for the next one. But I'd love to give a gift to your listeners if that would be okay.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So we've talked about, like connecting with yourself and what it feels like to do that. Excuse me. And how important that is and what the steps are. And I put together a little video series. It's just 3 very short videos. They're under 3 minutes each. And you can find it at whattheforkareyouvaitingfor.com.
I love it.
Which I hope that tells you something about me. I've got a little bit of a sense of humor. So whattheforkareyouvaitingfor.com will give you access to those 3 videos. And I walk you through steps about making decisions, very much like what we've talked about today.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's very generous. Thank you. So you said whatthefork.com.
What the fork are you waiting for?
Are you waiting for it?
Yeah. So it's long, but,
okay.
But see, that's because that's something your friends would say to you. They'd say, what the are you waiting for?
Yeah.
But so exactly. I say fork because that's a little bit more PC.
Well, we'll put that in the comments in the show notes so that people can access that. And in terms of your website, it's my main
website is just simply fork-road.com. A little simpler on that.
Okay, great.
But you can find me. Just Google Sheree Clark, Fork in the Road. I'll come up.
Fantastic. I'm sure you have a lot of great programs coming up, and I encourage our listeners to, reach out to Sheree if you have any questions and comments. We'd love to hear from you, and perhaps we can have a follow-up discussion if
I would love it.
And to hear about what you learned from the interviewer that you're going to be interviewing coming up in your next series. And let's keep us posted on what you're up to, and appreciate so much the tips and the advice you've given, and also sharing your personal story. It's fascinating, and we can all learn from each other's journey, I believe. So that's the whole intent of this podcast. And everybody has a story, and we can all learn from it. And we can only get better if we listen and learn from each other. So thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Sheree Clark. I really love her perspective on courage in midlife and how it takes guts to live the second half of your life for yourself. Here are some of the key takeaways. Number 1, at any given point, we are all at a fork in the road. Break down big decisions into smaller, more manageable ones so it doesn't cause paralysis. Don't be daunted by big decisions. Number 2, when you're trying to figure out what you want to do, explore interests that you've always had. They may lead to clues to what you might be wanting to do next. Look at the breadcrumbs you may be leaving along your own trail. Number 3, open up your calendar and look at your week commitments. Look at each and feel in your body what your reaction is to them. It's a clue to what you love to do. Number 4, sit in stillness and in quiet with no distractions and ask yourself, how are you doing? Where does it hurt? Ask yourself like you would ask a friend and be ready for the answers. Number 5, At a certain age, there's an assumption that we've arrived and everyone assumes you know what you're doing. We've forgotten that anything new requires some adjustment. Number 6, make a list of your successes. A courage journal. Write down 100 successes, however insignificant you think they may be. Number 7, you don't have to make quantum shifts. Courage doesn't mean doing unsafe things. Don't be afraid to peek out and push the edges. Push the door open before you fling it open. Number 8, the first step is to take a step, any step. Pause and congratulate yourself and then take another. Number 9, seek outside support, even if it requires vulnerability. Look for commonalities. We really are a village. Find help and ask for it. Be sure to check out the 3 videos that Sheree has offered on how to courageously make changes in your life at whattheforkareyouvaitingfor.com. I know you can be in many places, so I really appreciate you being here. If you found this episode helpful, please share with your friends. There really is no greater compliment. Please rate and review this podcast. I'd love you to join our free community as well at powerpurposeplay.ca. Drop me a line at Kavita at powerpurposeplay with any comments. I'd love to hear from you as well. Until next time, be courageous in all your little choices and take care.